We have Lee Johnson, who is also a principal and founder of Partners in Development. He has over 20 years of experience in successfully guiding organizations to improve productivity and developers and develop leaders. Lee has worked with the clients from industries including oil and gas, financial services, third-party logistics, private education, healthcare, and so on. So Lee has a tremendous resume, and we will look forward to hearing from him today on bridging the perceived distance and equipping mobile workers in virtual teams. Lee, it's a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you very much, Joe, and it is a pleasure to be here and with your organization. It's always interesting to hear the backgrounds and where people are located, and it sounds like we have an audience here today that's coast to coast in the U.S. as well as Canada. So I'm very happy to be here, and as Joe pointed out, happy to have questions as we go along the way. As Joe mentioned, we're going to be doing some polls. We're going to ask you to give us a bit of a thumbs up or a thumbs down, if that's an option, to let us know what your experiences are and what your thoughts are related to this important topic. I'd like to start out by sharing with you a few trends that are occurring in our work world today. Based on some research, virtual teams may be the single most important way that companies today are prioritizing and coordinating work. By 2020, 62% of employees are expected to work in virtual teams, and leading cross-cultural teams is in the top 10 global leadership development competencies based on some research that was done by the American Management Association and its associated organizations. So the question oftentimes comes up, why a mobile workforce? And there are lots of good reasons that you can see here. And I wonder if there's anyone here who's not been impacted by these changes in the world. This is the context in which we as members and leaders find ourselves as we do our best to accomplish the goals of our organizations and, in fact, in our personal lives. So for consistency purposes, let me give you a definition of a virtual team. Virtual team members could include those who work on site in offices, members who work from home, mobile workers on campus, and even those road warriors who are seldom in any one workplace for any length of time. There are also teams that are called hybrids, and that is they're composed of in-office and remote team members. And hybrid teams can create sort of an interesting set of dynamics in that very often both the remote team members and the in-office team members think that the other one has more advantages than the others. So what I'd like to do is get a better sense of what your experience is, and I'm going to ask Joe to bring up our first poll and to ask you what your experience is in terms of working in this virtual world.
All right, Lee, thank you so much. If you would all take a look at your screen and choose all the options that apply, we're going to get a feel for who's with us today. We see the votes coming in. I'm going to give you a moment to review those options. What is your experience? Are you a member or leader of a U.S.-based virtual team? Member or leader of a global virtual team? Member or leader of a hybrid team? Or not currently a member of a leader or virtual team? So as our members chime in today, we see the votes starting to slow down. Those contributions, taking a look, still have a few people maybe even changing answers. All right, about 2 or 3 more seconds. Let's go ahead and close that poll and let's share the results. Lee, what are your thoughts?
You're gonna have to read those to me, Joe. I'm not able to see those, if you would, please.
Sure, absolutely. So we have 43% of our audience is a member of a leader in a U.S.-based virtual team. It's the even number. As a matter of fact, we have another 43% are leaders in hybrid teams. We only have 7% of our group today that are leaders of global teams, and 14% are not currently a member or leader in a virtual team. So it looks like the vast majority, over 86% of our audience today, are members or leaders of U.S.-based virtual teams or hybrid teams.
Well, I find that that's not surprising, and it mirrors a bit what we talked about just a few moments ago about some of the trends that are occurring. More and more organizations are looking at ways in which they can leverage the benefits of remote workers, remote employees, and virtual work. And in fact, the technology is advancing in such a way that it enables people, team members, leaders, employees, in a way to operate more and more in a virtual world. In fact, that's what we're doing today. So I'm not surprised at that, and I think it's interesting that with this audience, it really starts to reflect what we're seeing globally. So thank you.
All right, so back to you, Lee, on the presentation.
Well, during our time today, I want to cover these 4 objectives that were promised, and I'll also share with you some other very interesting research about virtual teams and how we as learning and development professionals can be of assistance and to support of other virtual team members and leaders. First, let me tell you a true story about one team leader, virtual team leader, and one of his star performers. And as I said, this is a true story. The team leader was James, an American, who was leading a project team made up of members from the US and other countries across the globe, including Sue Min from Japan. Sue Min had done an outstanding job in accomplishing her tasks for the team, and had also gone above and beyond in helping other team members with their parts. One day, James decided he wanted to recognize Sue Min for her contributions to the team. And during a team meeting, he pointed out all of Sue Min's accomplishments and praised her for all that she had done to help the team. But Sue Min said nothing. So my question is, and perhaps we can get some responses in group chat, why do you think that Sue Min was silent? Why was she silent after James had just provided this recognition for all that she had done?
All right, because we have an answer from Corrine, Lee, and she says that because that was culturally inappropriate. Another person says that she comes from a collectivist society. She was silent due to the cultural differences, April says, and Rita says maybe she was on mute, or there is a time difference.
All of those are possibilities. Let me tell you what happened actually then. Later that day, James received a call from Sue Min's manager in Japan. He was told that Sue Min had resigned. You see, she felt that she'd been humiliated in front of the team and could no longer be effective. In her culture, as some of you pointed out, it's not appropriate to single out an individual from the team. The group is far more important than any individual. The moral of the story is that a lack of awareness and education have a high cost to leaders and their organizations. And in this case, it was probably a $100,000 mistake and was the unintended consequence of a well-intended action. What's becoming recognized in recent years is that virtual teams are decidedly different from their more traditional counterparts. These teams face different challenges and require different leadership and membership skills. They often span functions, time zones, national borders, languages, disciplines, and cultures, all factors that create added complexity, even if those team members are located in the same nation as in the US. What I'd like to do is to look at some of the differences between virtual and face-to-face teams. In research that was done by RW3 Culture Wizard, here's what respondents said were some of the major challenges: managing conflict, making decisions, delivering quality input, expressing opinions, and generating innovative ideas. And so my question to you is, how many of you have experienced some of these challenges? And Joe, I'm going to ask if participants would raise their hand so that we could get a quick view of how many of you have experienced these kinds of challenges in your work as virtual teams.
All right, so how many of you have experienced these differences in your work? We have a number of Lee, would you like to engage with? Let's go to Sherry real quick. Sherry, have you experienced? We're going to unmute. Oh, can't unmute Sherry. How about Bill? Bill, have you experienced some of these things in your work?
On occasion, yes.
All right.
Well, let's see what kind of challenges people have experienced, and perhaps we can go to group chat for this, Joe. What sort of challenges have you experienced in working with virtual teams or remote team members? And let's see if we can get some input from the group through group chat.
All right. So what challenges specifically have you faced in that regard? Specific challenges that you've faced with global teams. Feel free to chime in on chat or just give us a one-liner if you would like, and then I'll share those with Lee and he can comment. We want to engage you today and be able to address some of the specific things that occur to you. We want to attach Lee's knowledge to what you already know. So ways or specific ways that challenges that you've experienced in this area. All right. We have one, Lee. It says the cultural differences in communication is Tanika provides us with a comment there, Lee. In addition, so we have not able to read the room and having a pulse on the actual room environment comes from April. Those are issues that she's had. I've had that issue as well, where you can't read the room. It's very difficult, and you don't know if you're doing a great job or a bad job. And some of those things you just have to get through. You know, I am as we go through this, Lee, I'm also reminiscent of the ATD, the Talent Association for Talent Development, has their CPLP program, and a whole unit of this that I've just been studying for is on global communication and having the global mindset, and some of these things are in that study, of course, as well. I'm glad you're bringing these to our attention. Lauren says too much communication. Intentions get lost in the technology, so we appreciate that. So those are some of the big challenges that we've seen here, Lee, from our people attending.
You've hit on a number of those. Building trust from a difference. How do you select the right communications technology for the message? The third bullet point here, understanding what those cultural differences are, and then aligning team members behind the team's purpose and vision. How do you create and maintain engagement? And then this notion of being able to balance empowerment with the right structure. And my favorite is making the implicit explicit, and I'll talk about that in a bit. But there's some good news, and that is many organizations are finding that when they're well managed, virtual teams can deliver high quality, innovative products and services that meet or exceed expectations. And this trend is expected to continue as more and more members gain experience operating in this virtual work environment. And note that virtual teams are best at improving quality and meeting or exceeding expectations. There are 4 key factors that differentiate co-located teams from globally dispersed teams, and that is the factors of culture, time, distance, and technology. And these have a huge impact on team members' ability to build trusting, positive relationships, and their ability to align themselves behind the team's purpose. In 2013, the Association for Talent Development that you mentioned, Joe, came out with the results from their forum survey of enhancing executives' global virtual skills. And one of the things that this survey stated is that global leaders need specific leadership development because of the complex challenges that are associated with these. Yet, In another survey, over 73% of team leaders and members have either not had training, virtual team training, or they weren't satisfied with what happened. And if you're a leader of a global virtual team, the challenges are even greater. Those broader distances of time, geography, culture, and technology, the greater the complexity. So clearly there's a need for highly effective training and skill development for virtual teams. And for those of us in the learning and development field, we've got an opportunity to provide support to this mobile workforce and their leaders. I think as learning and development professionals, we can help, and this is part of our life's work. From a proactive perspective, we can share with organizational leaders what some of these key differences are between virtual and face-to-face teams and provide some development so that leaders and team members are better prepared to deal with those challenges of a virtual workforce. And when problems do occur, we can help these teams by identifying what are some of the root causes and work with them to create better processes, procedures, and relationships that drive performance. And there will be lots of opportunities, I think, for us as performance consultants. I'm going to share with you what are called 5 predictors of high-performing virtual teams. And you can use these to help your mobile employees and team leaders to work. These 5 predictors include a clearly articulated team vision and mission, virtual leaders that are viewed differently from co-located leaders, team members who demonstrate the 3 C's, higher leader and team member engagement, and that they're meeting challenges. I'm going to highlight these in the presentation and will provide you information about how you can receive a handout of the slides at the end of the presentation. What you're seeing here is our model, our Partners in Development model for working with high-performing teams. And this is just a skeleton view of the model, and we'll fill in a few of the details as we align them with those 5 predictors of high performance in virtual teams. So here's the first one. Clearly articulated team vision and mission. Let's look a little deeper at that one and see how that fits in with the model. Our model looks at within the plan phase, if you will, analyzing the environment, clarifying outcomes, and a team description. Creating a virtual team purpose and vision statements help to connect the virtual team to the larger organization and provide a clear sense of purpose. Environment identifies those organizational drivers behind the need for the team to operate virtually and invites sort of a realistic assessment of the potential obstacles and resources that are available to the team before it gets launched. Team description provides a sense of the team identity and determines the scope of the goals. It also considers the team member skills that are going to be required to teach those goals. Making time to articulate and document these builds understanding and alignment within the team and with stakeholders outside of the team. And then if there are differences in interpretations, they can be discussed and worked out earlier rather than later. And I just want to highlight this slide because these are the kinds of details, as we mentioned, that are in that plan phase. Team purpose and vision, environment, and team description. In this same study, the results show that there's a correlation between the extent to which organizations say they have good virtual leaders and the degree to which they see virtual leaders and leaders of co-located work groups as being different. That influences everything from leadership development strategies to some specific tactics for even meeting facilitation, for instance. Compared to leaders of co-located teams and work groups, here are some of the characteristics of effective virtual team leaders, with the largest differences including empowering team members, ensuring that the job gets done, emphasizing mission and purpose, considering the varying levels of skills of the team members, articulating a vision, and coordinating the business results, business functions. Here are the competencies and the skills research has identified as critical to effective leadership of virtual teams. And while these skill titles no doubt are familiar to you, the tactics to apply these skills are somewhat different. For instance, how does a virtual team leader build rapid trust with individuals that they seldom see or ever see face to face? We've got an assessment so that leaders can identify their strengths and development needs as a leader of mobile teams and workforces. So I'm going to ask our next poll here, based on your experience, what would you say are the top 1 or 2 skills that you think are most important for team leaders? Unfortunately, we're limited to 5 responses in our poll, so we've omitted a couple of these. But in our poll, what would you say are the top 1 or 2 skills that you believe are important for virtual leaders?
Lee, I think we've got, I think I might be on poll question 3 there, because right now it says, what training does your organization offer? So let me pull, it's the next one, yeah. So let me go to number 3 and we'll launch that. There we go. Which leadership skills do you think are most important? And select your top 2. Team purpose and vision, build rapid trust, balance team structure and member empowerment, cross-cultural management, performance management and coaching. And we have those results coming in right now. This one's going to be distributed across most of the choices, Lee. We are going to give everybody just a few more minutes to finalize their answer. Keep in mind, just choose 2. Our GoToWebinar allows you to choose more than 2, but if you'll just choose your top 2, we'll go ahead now and close that poll, and we will share the results. Lee, what are your thoughts?
Again, Joe, I'm going to have to ask you to quickly read those for me.
Sure. Team purpose and vision. Well, first of all, across all of those, it is very well distributed. So we have 45% team purpose and vision, building rapid trust 55%, balanced team structure and member empowerment 45%, and then the bottom 2, cross-cultural management and performance management and coaching, both at 36%. So it looks like the most important item, according to our group today, is to build rapid trust. And then the second 2 that are tied would be team purpose and vision and balanced team structure and member empowerment.
And personally, I would agree with those. If I had to pick the top 3, it would be those. Having that sense of team purpose and vision not only builds alignment, but it also helps teams to balance that team structure and member empowerment. And it also begins the foundations for building rapid trust. Let me share with you just a few best practices for team leadership. Team members and leaders who work remotely need to plan and allow more time to communicate with one another. And this isn't only communication about tasks, schedules, work processes, and procedures. They also need to allow time to build relationships. The highest performing teams develop strong, trusting relationships among their members. And these members share interests beyond work tasks and include the kind of social bonding that occurs over the proverbial water cooler for other co-located teams. Team leaders also need to learn to leverage the communications and collaboration technology that's available to them. It's what I call matching the technology methods to the message if they want to gain and maintain team member engagement. So they pick and choose the technology that's most likely to facilitate that communication. They're selective about using email and text. And when topics are more likely to become emotional, that's when they choose technology that has a visual component so that they can get a better sense of the nonverbal responses. And then, as I said, my favorite is making the implicit explicit. There's a saying that says anything that can go wrong with a face-to-face team can go wrong with a virtual team, only faster and less gracefully. So leaders and team members need to be much more specific in their communications.
All
The
right.
last component,
Go ahead, Lee. Did you want me to hide the poll now?
yes, let's go
Okay.
ahead and do that. The last thing I want to say about this is we've talked about some of the skills of virtual team leaders. I'd like to take a quick look at the skills of virtual team members who may work remotely from home, virtually locations around the world, or mobility. So this third predictor is team members who demonstrate what are called the 3 C's. I'm going to share with you what are the competencies that research has identified that are critical to members of high-performing global virtual teams. You'll notice that self-awareness, self-management, and relationship management are related to team members' emotional intelligence. And depending on their role or the team, some of these other competencies may be more important than others. We offer an assessment so that team members can identify their strengths and development needs as members of that virtual teams. And we also provide suggestions as to what they can do to advance their development before they talk to their leader and create a development plan. Here are those 3 C's. Communicate with teammates, commit and follow through, and collaborate. Collaborate by figuring out how they can best work together to meet those goals. In the prepare phase of our model, there are 3 more steps beyond identifying and selecting team members with the right skills. Onboarding is a very critical time to build rapid trust and create agreements as to how the team's going to define success, establish goals and milestones, make decisions, and communicate. So I have one piece of advice for you. If you can only have one face-to-face meeting with your virtual team, make it your first one. This is the best opportunity to build rapid trust and alignment behind the team's mission and vision. When we talk about this prepare phase, it's at that point that we're not only establishing work processes and protocols, but it is also about building trust among the team members. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that shortly. A team operating agreement is a useful tool to facilitate and record agreements that team members make about how they're going to work together. And that's particularly important for global virtual teams who have members who come from different cultures, who speak different languages. And as you pointed out, different cultures have different values about trust, decision-making, hierarchy, and personal versus private, just as in the story that I told about Sue Min. A team operating agreement is a written document that's created by the team members and their leader that defines the team's purpose, goals, and results. It includes agreements for handling work procedures, timeframes, and methodologies, and it includes communications protocols. How do we reply to one another in terms of timeliness for emails or texts? And teams that have members who aren't clear about how the work gets done or who have unenforced norms invariably get into trouble. And that's why we developed a team operating agreement, which is a tool that describes how the team members communicate and do their work together. Here's the 4th predictor of high-performing virtual teams, and that is high leader and team member engagement. Leaders of these teams know how to use tactics to keep people interested and active, especially during team meetings. And they do this in various ways, from leveraging the interactive features of web conferencing programs to creating and developing these team cultures that demand active participation. In our model, building relationships, tracking and assessing team performance, and coaching team members are part of what we call the produce phase. Once the team is launched and the members are going about their tasks, this is the most active phase, and it's the one that's most vulnerable for things to go wrong. So let me talk a little bit about building trust and solidifying relationships. As I said, team members who find ways to engage the hearts and the minds of their team members, both individually and collectively, also need to become masters at leading virtual team meetings. Take a look at some of the top relationship building challenges that virtual teams experience. I'm guessing these don't come as a surprise to you, and look at the top two: insufficient time to build relationships and multitasking among participants. So as leaders, we need to carve out time to build one-on-one relationships with our team members and member-to-member team relationships. And when we do so, that leads to high trust, and that's critical to high performance. A couple things to keep in mind about trust. There are two components to building high trust. One of those is called cognitive trust. And cognitive trust is based on logic. That is the assessments of someone's perceived integrity and ability. And to earn that cognitive trust from others, individuals have to do what they say that they will do, be credible and consistent, follow team-paced agreements, and be flexible. You know, it's been said that cognitive trust is a lot like money, hard to earn and easy to lose. And each day we have to make deposits into our trust accounts with others. The other component of trust is emotional, and that's based on the social bonds between people where there's genuine care and concern about each other. And here's some things that individuals can do to gain emotional trust. Expressed interest, ask questions. It's those relationship building skills that we do so naturally when we're face to face with people that we don't always make the time and thought to consider how to do that in a virtual environment. Now, I also promised you something on team meetings, and take a look at this. Virtual meetings have become the new normal. And as you can see on this chart, 42% of over 1,500 respondents said that they attended 10 or more virtual meetings in a month, compared with just 36 who attended face-to-face meetings. We also know that engagement in virtual meetings drops considerably, especially in meetings that are audio only. And in hybrid meetings where some of the members are co-located and others connect virtually, engagement drops even more. And the lure of multitasking becomes just too much for us to resist. Here is some interesting statistics about team meetings. In a typical face-to-face meetings, research suggests that as much as 80% of the time is spent in actual meeting, with only about 10% devoted to planning and then a later follow-up afterwards. But a best practice for virtual team meetings is to spend a lot more time up front planning the meeting agenda, technology to be used, and expected outcomes, and then following up to make sure that there's a clear understanding and commitment of responsibilities. When that's done, it reduces the time that people spend in meetings, and it increases in engagement. Here's a list of my top 10 suggestions for how you can make virtual team meetings more effective. I'm not going to read these to you, but I do offer you a challenge, and that is to read through this list and select the top one or two things that you could do to make your virtual teams more effective. I have some additional handouts related to team meetings to help you make them more effective, and I'll share those with you at the end of the session and tell you how that you can get those. The fifth predictor of high-performing virtual teams is that challenges are met. These teams are both effective and successful, and by effective, I mean that they focus on results, the tasks, goals, and tangibles that can be easily measured. By successful, I mean that in addition to getting the work done, these teams have better team member relationships and are more skilled at resolving conflicts. In other words, people want to work together. There are some important components in the results phase of our model, and together they look at both effective and successful elements of high performance. Those includes completing milestones, recognizing positive team member behaviors, delivering on those timely results, and yes, indeed, celebrating successes. As I mentioned to you, I believe that we as learning and development professionals can help our mobile workforce and virtual teams to be more productive and more successful. So I'm going to invite you to join me in providing that support. So with that, Joe, I'm going to pause, and in the remaining time that we have, I'm happy to take any questions that the audience might have.
All right, thank you, Lee. We're going to go to just a few comments that we've received and allow you to comment on those. If any of you have additional questions, now is the time to go ahead and pose those with chat question. Lee, Ritu says that that building trust rapidly seems very, very important. However, it sounds like when we say rapid trust, that it feels like something like it's not genuinely coming from the heart because someone wants but because they have to. In other words, and I guess one of my observations on that is you don't tell people you're trying to build trust rapidly. You simply take those measures to do it. How can you? What are maybe some things we need to watch out for when we proactively try to build trust rapidly?
Well, as I said, one of the key components of doing that is an opportunity for face-to-face interactions. So if there is an opportunity for the virtual team members to come together in a face-to-face situation, as I said, the first meeting is their best opportunity to do that. Relationships develop faster when people have the benefit of visual communication because body language oftentimes accounts for at least half. The research would say it accounts for probably between 50 and 60% of our communication with one another. So in the absence of that, it becomes much more difficult to develop trust. The other way to do that is to plan time in virtual team meetings for a bit of relationship building. So oftentimes in a face-to-face meeting where people are coming together, as people are arriving at the meeting, there's some social interactions. But frequently with virtual team meetings, as soon as the last person gets on the phone or gets on the technology, we start to deal with the task. So one of the recommendations is to plan in the agenda about 5 to 10 minutes at the beginning of the meeting to ask people to do some sharing about themselves. It could be something from share a success that you've had in the past 30 days. What's a hobby that you enjoy doing? Those are the kinds of things when people develop commonalities and begin to look at relationships beyond just getting the tasks done. I think rapid trust comes from recognizing those two components, that we first base our trust on someone who can deliver based on their credibility, consistency, and doing what they say they'll do. Then we can move to more of that emotional bonding trust. So those are some things that I think to keep in mind, and that can still be done very genuinely.
Thanks, Lee. One of the things that give the audience a resource, I have recently read a book by Stephen M.L. Covey. This would be Stephen Covey of the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It would be his son. And he's got a book called The Speed of Trust. And that's kind of Stephen Covey's son's shot at 7 habits, so to speak. But it outlines these different ways that people can build trust. And certainly Lee is also a wonderful resource there. So if you want to look up a great read, Stephen M.L. Covey, At the Speed of Trust. Corrine says that in their team environment, they do a warm-up before getting started with their agenda. I would echo Corine's statement. I lead a virtual team here at IACET as well. And, you know, there's one thing, we don't always communicate through phone, even though we have instant messaging and instant voice over IP. But one of the things that I've learned over the years is never just get started with the orders of the business when you're on a written communication. I don't ever instant message our staff and say, hey, did you do this? Or hey, did you do that? That might be to the crux of it. And some people, you may be able to get away with that. But there's others who will feel neglected, taken advantage of, that your communication is cold. If you don't say, hi, how are you this morning? Did you have any coffee? Or did you have a good day? Sometimes they'll say, how's your family? Sometimes it'll give you an opportunity to follow up with those individuals after the event is over. So those are some of the things that I do to establish that rapid trust, and I see that it's worked over the years
Joe,
for me.
You bring up a really great point. In part, it's about understanding what people need. So even having a team discussion about, what kinds of things encourage you to build trust or to have trust with another person, what kinds of things interfere or are barriers to you in building trust. And you'll note that there are some cultural differences about that. So having people to think about that and share that with other team members can be really helpful.
I think your focus on this during this webinar is outstanding. One of the takeaways of the Covey book is this. It is absolutely critical to provide trust and to have trust in one another, because essentially an underlying law is that when trust goes down, speed goes down, costs go up. Think about that. It's an amazing statement.
There's another saying that goes along with that, and that is, people don't follow people they don't trust.
Very good.
So good leaders develop trust with their team members.
Another question that has come in, Lee, is it said in the successful attributes of teams that the virtual leaders are different. What did you mean by virtual leaders are different?
Well, think about this from the perspective of how do you, again, build trust with people you rarely or very infrequently see. So virtual team leaders need to make more time and be more intentional about developing those one-on-one trusting relationships, as well as facilitating trusting relationship among team members who also may rarely see one another. So one of the things, for example, that virtual team leaders will often do is to identify projects in which 2 or 3 team members work together virtually. And as an outcome of that, not only do they accomplish tasks, but they build relationships and trust with one another. We also see that virtual team leaders need to become more aware in terms of their listening skills. Not only in the absence of that visual communication, they have to pay more attention to both the words that people use as well as to differences in their tone of voice. Virtual team leaders also need to be much more adept at leveraging communication and collaboration technology if they want to gain and maintain engagement, particularly with virtual team meetings. And so just like we've done in this presentation, they engage the use of polls, group chats, annotations as a way of getting input. They also pay attention to who's speaking up and who's not speaking up in virtual team meetings, and looking for ways then and trying to discover what does that mean. So they have to become much more astute in terms of communication. So those are just a few of the differences.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And another major, I think, what makes a leader different, sometimes we have to get off the phone or get off the chat and the email and get on the phone. Sometimes we often need to leverage that nonverbal, or it's actually the verbal tone of the conversation. I think sometimes, I know when I have a difficult conversation, I do not like to do that in email, especially if it's complex. Yeah. Or you have to give someone bad news. Oftentimes you need those nonverbal cues, or we say nonverbal. They need to hear tone in your voice that's non-threatening and the like.
Well, there's another saying that you'll appreciate, and that is, a manager once told me, if you can't solve a problem in 2 emails, pick up the phone. And to your point, if it's a situation where there might be some emotion involved, even better to connect with people through using some of the audio communication technology like Skype or some other means where people can have some eye contact and visual contact.
Another question that comes in, Lee, is about the use of cameras. I'm noticing more and more that more people are using cameras for even one-on-one meetings. What used to be a phone call is now a Skype meeting, and they almost always use their camera. I talked to a company recently about their use of the camera, and they insist on all of their employees when they have meetings to use their camera. What are your thoughts about that, and what do you think the pros and cons? Obviously, some of us like to stay in our house coat, so to speak, but at the same time, what are your thoughts on having a camera and using that? Do you see aid or advantage in that?
It comes back to something I referenced earlier, and we didn't have a lot of time to talk about it, but it's match the message and the technology. So in those instances where it's really important to have that visual communication, and certainly some meetings and some topics are best communicated with using that visual technology. In other instances where it's task-related communication, or if somebody needs an instant message, and particularly when there's high trust between the parties, oftentimes then, very often, you can utilize text messaging or email that focuses on text without having to take the additional time and technology to have that audio visual. So it's about being intentional and judicious in how to leverage that technology, I think. So match the message and the technology.
Corrine says that they require their organization to use cameras as well. I'm going to unmute Corrine just for a moment. Corrine, can you tell us a little bit about why your company chooses to do that?
Yeah, I'm in higher education, actually. And my team is distributed around the U.S., and that's just part of our culture. I mean, we do use instant messaging, and we have a thing where, if we greet each other when we arrive, because we're in different time zones, so we're never really sure who's where when, and it doesn't mean you're in the office, it means you're, quote, at work. So we greet each other when we arrive, and if we're heading out for lunch or whatever, it's just a thing. It's part of our culture. You just tell, if you were in the same building, you might be on your way down the hall and say, hey, I'm heading out for lunch. So you would do the same thing in a virtual team. So that's part of our culture. And when someone joins our team, we just describe that that's the way we roll. And anytime we meet, we use Zoom. Anytime we meet, we all have our own virtual offices. And so we just say, okay, meet me in my room, whatever. Or if it's a planned meeting, whomever's room is going to be used. It's just part of our culture that you will have your camera on. It's just not optional. And even if you're working from someplace and you want to be in your pajamas, then you need to have business on top and pajamas on bottom. But,
Good for you. Good for
one
you.
of the things I would say is having that visual technology increases the level of engagement
for sure.
With people in meetings. In the absence of that, people tend to default to more multitasking.
Exactly.
And so it's definitely in support of that. It also suggests to me that you are really planning your meetings so that you are the meeting agendas are focused on those topics where people really need to be engaged, and on other kinds of team business they can be better handled in other ways outside of the meeting. And that's where the planning of those virtual team meetings becomes really important. Email and text are fine if you're going to communicate with one or two people. They're not the best when it comes to communicating with groups of people, particularly if you are collaborating on documents or sharing information. Then using the technology of having a shared website or a repository for those shared documents is much more effective and efficient than sending email versions.
Right. We even use, for one-offs that are not planned, meetings that are just, like you said, if I would have otherwise picked up the phone, we typically just hop on our virtual room just because we want to see each other. It's more fun. And we can screen share because typically there's something we need to talk about. That's why I otherwise would have picked up the phone, because I need to show somebody something or they need to show me something. So yeah, and I can read faces. So we rarely use the phone, honestly.
Well, that's a good example of how the technology is changing so quickly.
Yeah.
And people embracing that technology. The reason that many people don't use the technology is because they don't know how to use it, or they're not comfortable in using it.
Yeah.
And so as you make that a part of your culture,
right,
people learn to become comfortable with that technology, and when that happens, they're more likely to use it, and it's more effective.
Right, and it is true that the camera piece is tricky, because not all of the virtual conferencing systems make it possible not to see yourself. And in most meetings, you don't see yourself. You don't look at yourself. So, in fact, Ottawa University has worked with Zoom, the company, since they started, and they've implemented a ton of the suggestions that we've given them as far as breakout rooms and chats and recording and all those things. But one of the things I'm looking forward to them implementing is for them to allow me to make my personal image either gone altogether or very small. I mean, I'd like to know that I'm, don't have food on my face, but other than that, I don't need to see myself in a meeting, and it's very distracting. That's right. That's one reason why people don't like the camera, because they don't want to look at themselves or see how other people see them. So they want to turn their cameras off.
Right.
We have a question from Ritu, and I think it goes along with what we've just been discussing. But and I used to think this as well, but as technology's come along, I've really changed my personal tune on cameras. Ritu says, that's the people who are insisting on the cameras, do they know why, capital letters, they do it? I'm trying to understand what is the value they think is in it. And I think Karine just articulated some of those reasons. I also think it comes back to basic human relations. Lee, Karine, I'd invite you to comment on what your thoughts are, to maybe extend on that answer for Ritu just a little bit.
It's both of those things. It's the human relations, and it's what Jim said earlier about the less likely to be multitasking.
Excellent.
I would also add that the real benefit, an additional benefit of that, is when there are topics that are potentially controversial, where there might be potential conflict, or where people's emotions might be raised, then the additional benefit of having that visual communication enhances the communication and moves to quicker resolution of those than in the absence of that. Think about how many times somebody has sent a text message, either you've sent one or you've received one, and it gets interpreted quite differently from what the sender intended it to be. And so it goes back to that making the implicit explicit. And in the absence of that, people start to apply their own interpretations of things that perhaps could be quite different from the sender.
Excellent. Well, Lee, we are just about out of time. We've got about 2 minutes until the top of the hour. And if you want to tell people how we can get in touch with you, the slides today will be available. They'll be available in 2 places. You can go to, if you're not a member of IASET, you can go ahead and go to Lee's site. Even if you are a member, feel free. I'd encourage you to visit Lee's site at partnersindevelopment.net, and you can take a look at the resources there. In addition, if you are an IASET member, you'll be able to get the handouts as well as the PDF of the presentation in our virtual webinar archive. You can also come back and listen to this recorded edition of the archive at any time that you would like. So on behalf of Lee Johnson, his friends at Partners in Development, and all of you, here at IASET, thank you so much for coming in today. Lee, any closing thoughts?
Well, I would just like to say also thank you. You've been a great audience, and I genuinely appreciate your engagement. And as you can see on this slide, in recognition for your participation, you'll receive a PDF of the slides today, some additional virtual meeting best practices, and we're offering a 15% discount on our training to anyone who's been participating today who would like that as well. I also just want to say again, thank you. It's great to be a part of this organization, and I'm honored to be a presenter. You can reach out to us on Twitter or LinkedIn at Partners in Development. And again, thank you so much.
All right, well, that'll close out our webinar for today. Keep in mind that we will have a evaluation coming your way via email in just a few minutes. Be sure to fill that out. Let us know what you thought of today's event. That'll help us make the next sessions better. Visit us also at isset.org. Take a look at our new Adult Train the Trainer programs, as well as our AP Live workshops. I'd love to see and meet each of you in person if you can get to one of those. Either in the next month or sometime in the next year. Love to see you there. Otherwise, today I think we'll stand adjourned. And it was great to have each of you, Lee. Thanks again. Everyone, have a good day.
Thank you.